Hey guys, Tarke here, and I want to quickly just have a little talk about the recent quantity versus rarity discussions we're having after Slippery Jim's video. Before we get into it, I just want to say two things. One, I just got out of the shower, so my hair is scuffed. And two, Slippery Jim made a very good video. The execution of the video is very good. The interpretation of the video by a lot of people is very bad. I personally have never been a massive fan of posts like this, be it videos, be it data posts, be it dumps on Reddit, etc. They're very interesting, but the problem is generally that people just take stuff blindly and don't interpret it correctly. So what do I mean by that? One person says one thing and then that's just blindly followed until the next person says another thing. You need to look at everything in a much larger scope, and to be perfectly honest, unless you have all of GGG stats, all of this is meaningless. Jim pops in my chat at one point and he basically says that it's a very fun video and it's very interesting, but you can't just blindly say one thing is better than the other based on a sample size of 500. And also one thing worth mentioning in this video is he was saying that rarity was better because he made more currency, but he got 2 extra doctor cards with quantity setup. So following that logic, the quantity setup is substantially better. Div cards are a big part of why people power farm specific maps. So in the case of saying, well, rarity is definitely better than quantity targeting, I'm saying this is what Jim was saying, this is what people have been saying to me since my last stream. Well, are you playing a full MF character and then purposely running maps which don't have valuable div cards? Because if you are, that sounds like you messed up. Yes, people do run specific maps which don't have valuable div cards, but they tend to specifically run those maps for experience per hour then, not so much currency per hour. And then if you're trying to go for experience per hour, you'd much rather be focusing on, you know, clear speed, damage, life, stuff which keeps you alive, because if you're chasing XP, you don't want to die, so on and so forth. And not only do you need to factor in, you know, what kind of maps you're doing, you also need to consider, are you sexanting your maps? Are you varling your maps? Are you chiseling your maps? Are you running certain leagues on your maps? What build are you running? What filter are you running? All of these things will completely skew results such as this. So, for example, let's say that Tarke records a video which is 500 runs of burial chambers. Quantity versus rarity. But I'm running a particularly strict loot filter which hides everything but raw currency drops. That means my test was basically meaningless. Rarity gives you currency from the fact that more uniques drop and you get more rare items. That vendors for ALK shards. Anyone who regularly plays SSF or anyone who regularly watches Uber's stream knows that a lot of SF players really like rarity for that exact reason. Rarity is a great way of sustaining alchemy, and this was what I was talking about with Jim with the context of you can never know RNG is RNG, and RNG is just RNG. You know, you could record 10,000 runs, but then RNG always skews in one way. You need to have years upon years of statistics to make fair comparisons and results, and without that, it's literally just taking blind stabs in the dark. A small analogy I like to make for this is how many licks does it take to get to the center of a lollipop? There are always multiple factors at play. So let's say that Jim's next video was how many licks it takes to the center of a lollipop. Let's say that Jim has a very warm mouth. Now that could affect the rate at which the lollipop softens. Let's say he has a particularly coarse tongue, or a very large tongue, or a very small tongue, or a very aggressive lick. And then I went to record a video, but it turns out that actually I have a colder mouth, or a softer, or a larger, or whatever. Do you kind of get what I'm saying? Basically, tongues are important to item quantity and rarity, and you can't just take other people's statistics blindly, and just because you have numbers doesn't mean that numbers mean what you think they mean. One also just side thing, I always think it's pretty interesting how in a lot of these discussions people don't factor in time. I think time is very relevant to these kinds of things, and I feel like what would be a much more interesting experiment would be trying to average out what we think quantity versus rarity versus movement speed is worth, trying to like quantify what we put the actual values on that is. Because yes, let's say that for example, you do get more loot from quantity than rarity, but you could actually balance out with a nice middle ground, and that's actually the better, end result. Or actually, you could get an extra 30% movement speed somewhere over 20 quant. Well, is that worth it? Short term, long term? That's, interesting. That's really the discussion we should be having. Not just blind, this is better than this. No, this is better than that. This is wrong than this. Whoo, hee, ha, 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 he. But yeah. So basically, what I'm adding to the discussion is Jim made a good video. Check it out. And don't blindly take other people's statistics, because statistics are just that. They're just numbers. They don't actually really mean anything unless you have millions upon thousands of results. If we have any competitive MTG Hearthstone players in the chat, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to sample size. If you're like, oh, I play Face Hunter and I've got 100 games on my grind to legend, these are what the meta is. It's like, well, no, that's not how it works. That's just what your win rate was that day based on the decks you ran, the decks you ran into, what deck list that dude. It's just it's a silly analogy, but it's a good analogy, and it all kind of makes sense. TLDR, quantity is good. Rarity's better than people think it is. Rarity's also nice. Quantity's generally better than rarity. Try and balance them out. But also movement speed is really good. And I would be very curious to see what the actual maths was between using movement speed boots versus gold worms on bow builds. Because personally, I would always use movement speed boots, but most people use gold worms. And that I think is interesting. Because, over the long term, what gets you more gains? Interesting. And also, one final thing on that movement speed note. You also need to factor in, what league it is. So, for example, in the case of, Bestiary or in the case of, Perendus, if a lot of your currency is coming from farming specific spawns, and the spawns are based on you get, 1 spawn per zone, 2 spawns per zone, etc., movement speed and the speed at which you clear maps becomes even more valuable. So, if you can run 1,000 zones at the time it takes someone to run 500 zones, and you're making the same amount of currency when you average it out, the guy running 1,000 zones has a higher chance of hitting the, Headhunter Kadiro or the Spirit Beast boss. So, yeah, movement speed. Let's have a movement speed discussion. Can someone make a video? I ran 500 barrel chambers with minus 1,000 movement speed, and then 500 barrel chambers with 1,000 movement speed, and then run the numbers through a sieve, and then deep fry the video. I'm Tarke. Have a good day. Bye-bye.